Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to week 9. I just want to start this lecture off by showing you that I have created this lecture companion that is going to work side by side with the lecture that I'm presenting on today. So please keep in mind that you can look at this lecture companion while you are following my actual lecture. I've created this so that you all have specific examples of these concepts that we're talking about today. You don't have to read the textbook. I am telling you everything you need to know as long as you pay attention to this presentation and you have this companion next to you. You will have the answers to every question that you need surrounding your specific research of interest. So for example, we're talking about constructs today, and this particular lesson is really focusing on sports psychology and the PCEP folks because this is dealing with concepts that are a bit more abstract when we're not using variables per se to measure, but we're looking at specific types of constructs. And if you don't know what a construct is, that's okay. I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag right now, but I am going to have a really well detailed presentation for you talking about constructs. And then I have examples for you surrounding all of the constructs that might be associated with your type of research. So for example, if we look at some of these slides, we'll see a definition of constructs. We'll see who uses constructs most often, which would be our PCEPs folks. I have examples of constructs here for each one of you: multiple sclerosis and exercise adherence, mixed martial arts, high performance and stress, overtraining and sports psychology, coach-athlete relationships, cardiac rehabilitation, ADD and ADHD. So I have all of this information that I have done for you in this particular lecture companion. So please have this nearby so when I start talking about specific things that might be abstract, you have examples. So for example, I have created examples for each one of you talking about constructs and relative indicators. And if you don't know what a relative indicator is, that's okay. After this presentation, you will know exactly what it is. I have constructs and relative indicators for overtraining in sports psychology. I've created it for cardiac rehabilitation. I've created it for ADD and ADHD. So I have created everything you need to fully understand how these concepts apply specifically to your area of research so that there is no question how to use it. And moving forward, when we get into our next few lit circles, you have examples of how to use these items and which type of research to look for if I say, hey, I would like for you to look at a paper that talks about constructs in ADD and relative indicators associated with that. So I have done all the work for you. Now, when you get to the very end of this, it's only about 35 minutes. I will kind of talk a little more about some of this information, but I'm not going to do all the work for you. I'm just going to tie connect some dots per se. So at about 30 minutes, maybe 32 minutes, I will talk about a few of these just so that we understand everything, and then the ball is in your court. We are moving into some introductions to statistics. We're going to start with a real basic and relaxed approach to our first really conversation about statistics. And I know people get a little bit of anxiety when it comes to these types of lectures. And I do as well, because teaching statistics is definitely not a fun thing. But we are not going to go into a deep dive because this is not a statistic course. I'm just providing you this lecture to kind of help you understand some of the foundations of statistics that are conducted in the papers that you are reading. So this is going to be an introduction of measurement concepts and techniques in research. And we are going to be talking about things such as variables and constructs and different types of data collection. So let's kind of get into this and talk a little bit about what this lecture is going to entail. So
we are going to have basically this conversation about measurements and the process of quantifying variables. And we know that this is a really important thing because we're collecting data. In our case, we're reading about other researchers that have collected data, that have assessed certain outcomes and have drawn conclusions. But it's really, really important that we understand what variables they're measuring. And when we have our conversations in class, sometimes certain groups of researchers will miss important variables, or they measure variables that aren't very important, and it kind of skews the data, and it skews our interpretation of the data as well. So we're going to talk about this a little bit. And why is this important? Because, well, without these variables, we're kind of blindly moving into research. So these variables and these constructs that we're going to talk about today, they're essentially like our GPS. Like they're navigating. They're helping us navigate the complexity of the landscape of human behavior or human performance, right? So without being able to quantify variables and qualitatively assess constructs, we wouldn't be able to conduct research. So these are the things that we are going to base our findings on to tell a story and to add to the pages of scientific literature. In our case, we are reading what other scientists have done and what they have measured and what they have analyzed and what they have contributed to the pages of scientific research. So with no further ado, let's get into what some constructs are. So importantly, constructs align themselves with qualitative data. And we've had this conversation about qualitative data, and we talked about how there are mixed methods of research, and some people in certain labs will use a combination of qualitative and quantitative. We did talk about how sports psychology might lean more towards the qualitative, as well as exercise psychology might lean a little more towards the qualitative than the quantitative. But what we have to understand is when we're talking about these constructs, we're talking about abstract concepts that can't be measured directly. So if we wanted to measure an example of pain or motivation, we can't measure them directly. We're going to require other proxies or other sort of resources to help us quantify or to put a value on pain or motivation. So pain and motivation, those might be more aligned with sports psychology and exercise psychology or physical therapy. We might use pain and measure pain via surveys, right? But we can't measure it directly. So when we're looking to understand human behavior and outcomes, we generally tend to use constructs. And I put an analogy here that constructs are kind of like the blueprint for a building. Constructs guide our understanding of complex variables. So if we are building a house, we have blueprints. The blueprints themselves aren't the home. We have to put those blueprints to use. We have to get wood, nails, hammers, labor, right? Electricity, plumbing. Those things act as the devices that bring the house to life. But the blueprint itself doesn't bring the house to life. So that's what I meant by we have these complex variables that help us bring these ideas, bring values to these ideas, such as pain or motivation. Pain is not something I can measure directly. There's various types of pain. There's sharp pain, acute pain, long-lasting pain. So we need other sort of proxies to put a value to the level of pain. Okay, so let me give you a couple of examples here. So big picture. Oh, that's a typo. That should say constructs. That's just what happens when I create these things early in the morning and then I present on them to get them up to you by 2 o'clock. So the big picture, we have these things of interest, right? Let's say we were interested in job satisfaction or relationship satisfaction. Well, that is something I cannot measure directly. So this is a construct, right? I want to somehow measure this relationship satisfaction. So how do I measure that? Well, I have to rely on these other factors, such as factor A, factor B, and factor C. These might be variables that I can measure that will help me quantify a value of relationship satisfaction, right? So I can use constructs to have this big picture, but I'm going to need different variables to help me quantify or qualify the level of satisfaction that I might have or might not have about a relationship. So what's important to understand is that constructs and variables are not the same thing, but they can be used within like a two-way street to help one another in quantifying or qualifying information. Okay, so let's say we had relationship satisfaction. That is the construct, not the sinsters. I don't know what that is. That should say constructs. I have this construct that I want to measure. Well, what might be some things that are involved in relationship satisfaction? Let's say I'm in a romantic relationship. Well, one of the factors might be the time that the person dedicates to me, right? Are they with me on the weekends? Are they only with me on Sunday? Are they only with me on Monday? Are they with me 7 days a week, right? So the time that they allocate towards this relationship will have an impact on my relationship satisfaction. Let's say factor B is the dedication to the relationship. Are they talking about dating other people? Are they talking about getting married? Are they thinking about getting engaged? Is engagement and marriage not on the table? They'll never do it. Well, those types of factors might impact my relationship satisfaction. So I have to take this time factor. Okay, they're not with me a whole lot. Factor B, they never really talk about marriage. And then factor C might be, well, do they want children in the future, right? And maybe they do, maybe they don't. But if these things all are supporting my happiness in relationships, well, then my relationship satisfaction will increase. But I don't know that until I take these factors into account. Now, if these factors are all not satisfying me, if they don't spend a lot of time with me, they don't want to get married, and they don't want children, well, those various factors will decrease my satisfaction, right? So this is something I can't measure alone. This is a construct in which I need other proxies to help me quantify this in some way. All right, so that is what a construct is. And just to have a little more of an example here, these are abstracts, right? So a construct is something that is abstract, that's used to represent a phenomenon that is not directly measurable. So if I had intelligence, that is something I cannot directly measure. I have to use other variables or other tools or other proxies to help me measure intelligence, right? Motivation, if I want to somehow quantify or qualify motivation, I can't do that because it's too abstract. I have to have other proxies or other related factors that I can use to somehow quantify or qualify this. Friendliness. How do you qualify or quantify friendliness? How do you do that? Well, none of these things are directly measurable. So these are constructs that rely on other factors to help me quantify them. So let's look at another example here. So if I have intelligence, okay, I have to measure intelligence. I have to infer it from other tests, right? So intelligence can't directly be measured. I can't directly measure it. But what I can do is I can directly observe and measure other things that will quantify or qualify intelligence. So for example, let's bring this pen up here. If I do an IQ test score, right, that will give me some sort of measurement of a degree of intelligence. If I look at language proficiency, that is something that I can directly measure or directly observe that will give me some sort of measurement. If I had somebody do spatial intelligence, well, I could use my score from spatial intelligence. I can combine that with language proficiency, And I can combine that with IQ scores and get something that is now measurable, right? Or I can even add in another one, mathematical intelligence, right? I can have someone take a test, they'll get a math score, and I can take all of these factors here, and I can say, well, based upon these 4 tests, this person's intelligence is, let's say, right here. Let's say they're in the 70th percentile, right? So I'm just going to put 70, okay? I can't measure this directly. This is a construct, but what I can do is I can measure some of these things that give me an idea of how intelligent somebody is, okay? So I hope that makes sense. So let me move on to the next slide here. So when we want to develop ways to measure constructs, we have to look at other relevant indicators. And I gave you an example of that here, right? This is a big abstract thing that is really hard for me to directly measure. So I have to come up with other related indicators or proxies, right? And that's what these are another type of related indicator. This is another type of related indicator. Another type of related indicator, another type of related indicator. These 4 things, and I could have several more, right? I could have somebody that does, let's say, musical intelligence, right? Or let's say writing intelligence, right? They not only have a language proficiency, but they have a writing proficiency. So these different sort of related factors help me quantify intelligence, okay? And again, constructs are something that more align with you folks that are in exercise psychology and sports psychology, right? These are more kind of your tools of the trade for conducting research. And you'll probably see these now in your papers. So what I'm trying to do is just give you more of an understanding of what tools these researchers are using to present these papers and to publish these papers and to show data that they collected that is measuring something like intelligence. So we know we can use relative indicators. We know we can use proxies. And what do these do? Well, these accurately reflect the underlying phenomenon that we are interested in, right? So these validate our construct, right? So if we want to go back to this, well, this is the phenomenon that I'm interested in, is a relationship. Am I satisfied in this relationship? I can't measure that directly, so I have to bring in these indicators or these proxies that validate where my happiness is or my unhappiness is in relationships. Now, let's look at constructs through different lenses here. And I've been giving you guys examples of how these things might look in your perceived area of science. So if I look at physical therapy and I think of constructs, right? I think of pain. Pain is something that is an abstract phenomenon. I cannot measure that directly. So I have to look at other related factors or proxies that will give me an idea of how much pain or how little pain I am in, right? So we have a visual analog scale. You guys are probably familiar with this, okay? The subject, this measures a patient's rate. It has them rate their pain intensity on a scale, right? That could be 1 through 10. Numeric pain rating scale, right? Patients provide numerical rating of their pain, right? So this is one. This is another one. The McGill Pain Questionnaire. You guys are probably familiar with this, right? And then we have patient-reported outcome measurement information system. This evaluates how much pain interferes with daily activity. So we can't directly measure pain. This is our construct, but we can use these tools that will help us get an idea of how to quantify or how to qualify the intensity of pain or the lack of intensity of pain. So another important thing to share is that constructs aren't always necessary. Due to the nature of the class and the different scientists that we have in this course, some of you may require constructs and have to use these proxies to measure them. Some of you may not. Some of you, those of you in the physical therapy realm, it might be more of a more concrete hypothesis that you can measure with concrete variables and give very specific values that indicate a quantification of these variables, right? So it's not always the case. So, for example, as I mentioned in the previous slides, sports psychologists, exercise psychologists, you might use constructs. You might have these abstract ideas that you're trying to measure, and you have to rely on proxies in order to do that. Some of these proxies can be variables. But in the biomedical sciences and the human performance sciences and the nutritional sciences, we don't use constructs. We use very concrete variables to measure and to quantify what it is exactly we're looking for. So just to kind of drive this message home, please understand that constructs can't directly measure. Variables we can directly observe and measure and provide a value to. These two can be used interchangeably. Some people might use a mixed method where they use constructs and variables. In my world, we use only variables. In the psychology world, you use lots of constructs, but you use variables to quantify those abstract ideas or abstract phenomenon. And they can be used interchangeably. So I hope that kind of gives you a really solid background of what these things are. So again, constructs are focal of qualitative, variables are quantitative, and that is it. So if we talk about practical examples, if we're looking at constructs in practical examples, we could say, okay, well, exercise motivation. How do we directly measure this, right? Well, we can do self-reported scales, we can do surveys, and we can observe behavior, right? What kind of observations can we do? Well, if we see somebody is motivated, the time they spend on a certain task might be extenuated, right? It might be longer. Or the number of attempts they make on a task might be longer. Where if it is they're not motivated, the time spent on a task will be shorter, and the number of attempts they might do on a task might be shorter. So this is just kind of closing out that construct idea. And now we're going to start moving into types of data and types of scores. So again, as I mentioned, we're kind of moving into a little bit of statistics here. We're just going to take baby steps as we move into it. This course definitely presents some challenges with us being online and meeting once a week occasionally. So I just want to make sure I hit the mark and I present this information slow enough and thorough enough that we're all keeping up, and most importantly, we're applying what we're learning during class. So when you are reading your papers with your partners, you're like, oh my gosh, all I hear is Mr. Blackburn's voice in my head just saying constructs and variables and blah, blah, blah. He's just droning on and on and on. Well, good, because that's my job. It's repetition makes perfection. And hopefully you'll start extracting some of this information as we move forward and you are reading your papers. So let's talk about types of score and types of data. And again, this is kind of a brief introduction to stats or statistics. So types of scores that we might commonly see as we are reading our papers, especially in the methods section, we might see things like continuous scores. And you're like, okay, well, what is a continuous score? Okay. And I'm going to provide you just some very basic details right now, and then we'll go into a little more of a deeper dive. So a continuous score is something that is measured on a scale, right? Height, weight, age, perhaps. If we look at a thermometer that provides a range of temperatures, that's where a continuous score would exist, right? Within a range. You could be 4'2", you could be 6'4", right? You can be 120 pounds, you could be 320 pounds. So there is a range or a continuum in which these scores can be produced upon, right? And then we have discrete scores. Now, discretes are whole numbers, and that's how they're very different than continuous numbers. Discrete scores might be like the number of visits. So if you're talking about exercise motivation and you are letting people decide how often they come into workout and you are observing them, well, that's a discrete score. So maybe they came in 15 times last month, 10 times this month, and you can see that their motivation is dropping because their discrete scores are dropping as well. And I have an analogy here. So if you were counting people in the room, there are whole numbers, there are no fractions, right? This we can have decimal points, we can have fractions. This we can't. It is all or none. Then we have something called nominal scores. And nominal scores are a categorical data. So this could be gender or diagnosis or race. If we're looking at a basket of fruit, we could say, well, in this basket of fruit, we have 3 apples, 4 oranges, and 2 bananas. That would be nominal scoring. And I'll give you some examples of these as we get further into the lecture for your own specific lens for your science. We also have interval scores and we have ratio scores. Now, I'm not going to talk about these this week. I will talk about those at a later time. But we're going to get into nominal scores, discrete scores, continuous scores, and I have one more on here that I want to talk about that I didn't present on this one, but I have a couple of slides designated for it, okay? So let's move into our first type, and that is a nominal score. Okay, so nominal data or a nominal score, this is the type of category that represents distinct categories. And what do I mean by that? So these are categories that cannot be ordered or ranked. So each category is distinct and it represents its own group, and it's generally a different group from one another. So what does that mean? That sounds like word salad. Well, maybe it sounds like fruit salad. So let's talk about fruit salad. So if I had a basket of fruit here, I could order these, right? I can't rank them, but I can just say, okay, well, we have 2 peaches, 3 sets of grapes, 1 yellow apple, 3 plums. Now, even though I'm identifying these, there is no specific order and there's no specific rank. There's just different groups. So each type of fruit represents a different category. And I can sort them based on their type, but one is not valued higher or lower than another one. So there's no inherent order or ranking among these fruits. They are just simply different categories. So you could also think of this like a box of crayons, right? Where each crayon is a different color. You can name each color, but you can't rank them in items of importance. The same thing with the fruit. I can't put these, they're just all fruit. They're different types of fruit, but one fruit is not more important than another fruit. And if we look at this here, I have another example for you of what nominal data looks like. So we could have race, right? Black, white, Asian, or other. So I'm just saying we have this nominal topic. And within this topic, I have these different types of race. I can't order them. I can't say one is more important than the other. All I can say is that we can I guess we could quantify them, right? Because I did that on the last slide. I said that we have 2 peaches, 3 sets of grapes, 1 apple, right? And that's nominal data. I can go by hair color. Some of you have blonde, some of you have black, some of you have brown, some of you have red, some of you have other color hair, right? None of them are more important than anyone else. I can't put them in any order or rank. I can just say this is what we have. Marital status. You can be married, you can be unmarried, you could be divorced, you could be other. None of them have any specific importance. I am just putting them by group. Okay, we can do the same thing for gender. Now, one of the things that we can do with nominal data is if you're collecting this data, or if you see data in a paper that you're reading, we can assign numbers to represent a certain category, right? So I could say blonde hair, there'll be 1s, black hair will be 2s, brown hair will be 3, red hair will be 4, others will be 5, right? So we can that's the wrong word. We can assign different numbers to these different types of hair color. Now, what's important about that, and this is to demonstrate that there is no rank, there is no importance, one is not more important than the other, is I could switch these values and the meaning doesn't change whatsoever. I could say, okay, well, in this data set, blondes are identified as 1, black hair is identified as 2, brown hair is identified as 3, red hair is identified as 4, and others identified as 5. And if I change this all up and I said blonde is 2, black is 1, brown is 4, red is 5, other is 3, it doesn't matter. They're unordered categories. It doesn't matter what number we assign them. So that would be an example of nominal data. And I'll give you some examples of that in a moment. So if I was looking at physical therapy, right? Nominal data could be, well, are they getting manual therapy, electrotherapy, or exercise therapy? There's no order of importance. It is just providing categories of the type of therapy they could be receiving. If I was looking at sports psychology, am I looking at soccer players, baseball players, or tennis players? It doesn't matter. One is not more important than the other. It's just nominal data that is telling us what the categories are. And if I looked at exercise psychology, I could look at categories of disability. Do they have physical disability, cognitive disability, sensory disability? It doesn't matter what disability they have. I'm just identifying the categories of disability. And then another example of what nominal data could be is if you love going to libraries like I do, well, how are books organized? Books are organized by genre. So you can go into the romance section, you can go into the fictional section, you can go into the non-fictional, you can go into political, you can go, my favorite section, to the horror section and look at some horror novels. None of these books are more important than each other. They are just classified and organized by group. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these examples here to provide you with a little more support. So if we're looking at nominal data, and this occurs within data that is in unordered categories, it doesn't matter. If we're looking at physical therapy, we could talk about the type of injury. Okay, we could have sprains, fractures, strains, or dislocations. I could switch this order around and it won't matter. I could say we have dislocations, strains, fractures, or sprains, or I could say we have sprains, fractures, strains, or dislocations. They're just classifications and categories of types of injuries. We could do the same thing with diagnoses. I could have arthritis, stroke, neuropathy, post-surgical recovery. It doesn't matter. They're just categories, right? They're categories of diagnoses. Do the same thing with treatment type. Is it manual therapy, exercise therapy, hydrotherapy, electrotherapy? We're just using classifications of therapy, right? Now, the same thing would be true for sports psychology. I could have type of sports, right? Soccer, baseball. Are they team sports? Are they individual sports? Are they combat sports, right? So we're putting these into categories. None are more important than the other. We could have athlete gender, male, female, non-binary. Okay, we're just classifying them by category. Levels of competition. I could have recreational, amateur, or professional. This is nominal data. I could switch this around. I can say we have professional athletes, we have recreational, we have amateur. Doesn't matter. Motivation orientation. Intrinsic motivation or extrinsic motivation. These are categories of motivation. And if I go to exercise psychology, I can do the same thing. I could talk about type of disability, right? We have autism spectrum disorder. We have cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Doesn't matter. They're just categories. We could have types of physical activity that we are doing with these groups here. We can have swimming, adapted sports, dance, gymnastics. We can have exercise environment. Are they doing it at home, school, community center, therapeutic facility? And we can even do participation levels, right? Actively participating, non-participating, occasionally participating. So these are all examples of what nominal data is, okay? We're just categorizing. There's no level of importance. We're just separating things by their similarities. And just to kind of go back to beat a dead horse, we're separating things by their similarities, or if we're talking about genres in a book, we're putting groups together by their similarities. Okay, so now that we had gone through that lecture and we have gotten a pretty good idea of what constructs are and what these proxy measurements are, and these different types of ways that we can use these values, now let's talk a little bit about the companion. So just to beat a dead horse, I have created a series of constructs that might be associated with your specific area of research. So, for example, if we're talking about self-efficacy, which we've heard a lot about this semester, how do we measure self-efficacy? This isn't something that we can say, oh, they either have it or they don't. There is a continuum of this, and each individual has their own self-efficacy, their own strength or weakness with self-efficacy, and their own continuum. So therefore, we have to create proxies or other indicators that might help us measure this. If we're dealing with MMA fighters, have we ever thought about body imaging concerns? If so, how do we quantify this? If you have 3 fighters and one of them cut 30 pounds and one of them cut 10 pounds, and the individual that cut 30 pounds has more body image concerns because of the massive amount of weight that they had cut and how they look, well, how do we quantify that? Well, we might do a body shape questionnaire. These things actually exist out there. So by using the body shape questionnaire as an indicator, we get a better idea of how body image concern might impact an MMA fighter. The same thing that's true with high performance and stress. There's a group out there that is doing that with both business folks and professional athletes. Coping strategies. This is something that is a construct. It is an abstract strategy, right? How do individuals cope? Well, everyone does it differently. So if we have an N of 45 and each one of these individuals copes differently or has different coping strategies, how do we actually quantify that? Well, we have to quantify it by using a proxy or an indicator that determines what these coping strategies are. So this companion that I've created, it's taken quite a few hours to get this thing completely created. This is for you to use for the next series of lit reviews and projects that are coming down the pipe. So that way you don't have to do all the research on your own. I have already done it. So I had also presented another thing on types of scores. So you will have seen that in the presentation. And fear not, I have created examples of types of scores. First and foremost, I talk about continuous scores, discrete scores, and nominal scores. I talk about what these things are, and then I give you guys all the examples that you might need surrounding continuous scores, discrete scores, and nominal scores. And then here's constructs again to show you how we might use these different types of scores with these different types of constructs. You can see here I have the same thing, and the same thing for each specific type of research that is being done. And then lastly, I talk about interval scores and ratio scores. If you are not familiar with what these are, I define them very well in the presentation, and I provide you with examples as well so that you have everything you need to put these things together and to better understand this process. So I hope these companions assist you. I'm going to create more of these as the semester goes on because we are going to get busier now with our final few projects. I am going to move to online lectures more to give you more work time with your groups during class time and also to do consulting during class time if anybody needs any help. So I hope this helps, and I will see you guys on Thursday. Take care and have a great week.